I don't remember dying. 1 second there's nothing. Pure black. The kind of dark that has actual weight to it, the kind you feel. Then heat. Not the warm, comfortable kind. The kind that crawls under your skin and just sits there. Steady, like a second heartbeat. My eyes open. And the first thing I see is gold. Bars, walls, chains, everything gold. Absolutely everywhere, in every direction I look. A cage. A very expensive, very beautiful, very carefully constructed cage. But still, unmistakably, undeniably a cage. I try to stand up. My legs don't cooperate. My arms don't cooperate. Nothing in this entire body cooperates with me at all. Because I don't have arms anymore. I have wings, small ones. Pathetic little things, covered in orange and red fluff that's still half wet. Still damp, which means I haven't been here long. Maybe a few hours, maybe less. The egg cracked recently. I'm brand new here, and I realize, slowly at first, then all at once, I'm a bird. Not just any bird. I'm a phoenix sitting in a golden cage. A baby phoenix, fluffy, helpless, sitting on a velvet cushion inside what looks like a very expensive royal palace room. Cool, totally fine. Completely normal way to start whatever this new existence turns out to be. Completely normal Tuesday. I try to make sense of what's happening. Last thing I remember, I was human. I had a name, a face, a life that was mine. That life wasn't going great by the end, honestly, but it was mine, and I knew the shape of it. Now I have wings and zero control. My first instinct, immediate, powerful, completely reasonable, is to burn everything down. And I mean that literally, completely. I'm a phoenix. I can already feel it, that heat inside my chest, just sitting there and waiting like it's been there forever. Like a furnace that's been running low and quiet for a long time and is just now starting to wake back up and remember itself fully. One good exhale and this entire room goes up. The curtains, the tapestries, the guards outside the door, all of it gone instantly. But I stop myself. I breathe slowly and deliberately, and I stop myself. Because here's the thing about this entire situation. You cannot win it. Fight against an entire kingdom on day one. That is just math. That is just how reality fundamentally works. I need to be smart about this. I need to learn everything about this place before I make a single move in any direction. So I do what any rational person reincarnated as a mythical firebird would do in this exact situation on this exact strange day. I sit down on the velvet cushion, I look adorable, and I watch everything. Every person, every detail, every single day. Every guard rotation, every servant's routine, every tiny thing that might matter someday when I finally make my real move. The first person to walk through that door on the first morning is a boy. Maybe 14 years old, maybe a little younger. He's wearing a royal servant's uniform that's slightly too big for him. Sleeves rolled up, collar sitting crooked on his neck, nervous hands, kind eyes. The kind of kid who clearly doesn't belong in a place like this, but ended up here anyway somehow. He's the one assigned to take care of me, to feed me, maintain my cage, keep the kingdom's prized trophy alive and presentable. His name I learned quickly from hearing the other servants call to him in the hallway outside. It's Kale. Short, quiet name. Every single morning, without exception, Kale shows up before sunrise, while the rest of the palace is still completely asleep. He changes my water first, carefully, making sure the bowl is clean. Then he arranges the food in the small clay dish beside it. Little pieces of fig and date and something I can't fully identify, but that tastes like it was soaked in honey and rosewater. Actually genuinely delicious. I've had worse breakfasts, even back when I had hands and a proper kitchen and a whole human life. He talks to me while he works. Not because anyone is watching. There's never an audience at that hour in this particular room. He just talks. Quietly, easily, like he's always done it. Like I'm a person sitting across from him having a normal morning. Like I understand every single word coming out of his mouth. Which I do, obviously, but he doesn't know that part about me, yet. You're the most valuable thing in the whole palace, he tells me one morning, refilling my water bowl with his careful hands. He says it the way someone states a genuinely sad fact, not bragging, not proud of it, just describing the world he works in. I look at him over the rim of my water bowl. I file that sentence away in the part of my brain marked important and keep eating. I learn more from Kale in those early morning visits than I could have gathered from a month of watching anyone else here. The kingdom is called Verith. It sits at the center of 3 mountain ranges, wealthy and perfectly isolated from the wider world. Surrounded by natural walls of stone and snow on every side. Rich in minerals, especially famous for its gold mines, obviously. The kind of place that's been telling itself for centuries that it's the center of the universe and mostly gotten away with believing it. The king's name is Aldrich II. Old now. Sick for the past couple of years, though he hides it with considerable effort daily. He holds on to power the way certain men hold on to power. With both hands, with his teeth, with pure stubborn refusal to let go. And me. I am his greatest trophy. His crown jewel. his living proof that the gods themselves personally approve of his entire reign. Apparently, a phoenix hadn't been seen anywhere in the known world for over 300 years. Not once, not even a reliable rumor. When the royal hunters came back with an egg, warm to the touch and faintly glowing at the seams, half the court thought it was fake. They figured it was a fraud, a painted stone, some clever trick by a traveling merchant who wanted a very significant payday. But then the egg cracked, and I climbed out of it, still damp, glowing like a small collapsing star in the middle of the room. And the room went completely, absolutely, totally silent. The way rooms go silent when something impossible is right in front of you. King Aldrich was there personally. He watched me climb out of that shell, and something changed in his face almost immediately. He decided in that moment this was a divine sign, a blessing from whatever gods Vareth happened to believe in at the time. The Phoenix of Legend had returned to the world after 3 centuries. And it had chosen Vareth. It had chosen him specifically. The Phoenix belongs to this kingdom. The Phoenix belongs to the crown. The Phoenix belongs to Aldrich II. End of discussion. He had this cage built within 1 week of my hatching. Gold shipped on emergency priority order from the eastern mines directly. Every bar measured and fitted and locked into place with runes engraved by the palace's most senior and experienced mages. Fire-resistant enchantments. Heat-dispersing spells. Specifically designed so that even a phoenix's flame couldn't burn through. Someone had thought about this very carefully. Someone had thought about this more carefully than I found entirely comfortable. The cushion, imported silk from a country 3 kingdoms away, shipped at significant expense and at impressive speed to arrive. The water bowl made of silver engraved with little flying birds around the rim. The food, always fresh and always thoughtfully varied. He spared nothing in making sure I was comfortable, well-fed, well-maintained, and totally, completely, permanently trapped. Both things perfectly at once, comfortable and trapped simultaneously. He was clearly very practiced at that particular combination. Every few days, without announcement or warning, King Aldrich himself comes to look at me. He doesn't bring food, doesn't speak. He stands outside the cage bars with his hands folded behind his back, and he stares at me like I'm something he purchased. Like I'm a very expensive painting, or a very powerful weapon he's keeping in reserve for a war he hasn't decided to start yet. Something he paid a great deal for and fully intends to get use out of eventually, when exactly the right moment presents itself. I stare back, perfectly still, perfectly calm. My little bird face giving away absolutely nothing about what's happening inside me. Inside, I'm cataloging every single detail. His health, the slight tremor in his left hand, the way he breathes too carefully. The guards' schedules, which ones are truly attentive, which ones spend half their shift thinking about something completely different. Who has keys to this room? How many locks on the door? Where every exit is? Which walls face the outside of this palace? Which windows actually open? Which are sealed? How far the drop would be from each one? Everything. I file away everything, because I'm not leaving yet. I'm nowhere near ready to leave. But I am absolutely, certainly, completely leaving eventually. The hardest part of those early weeks, and I want to be very clear about this because it genuinely matters to understand, the hardest part isn't the cage itself. It's not the bars or the runes or being stared at by curious courtiers on their tours. The hardest part is pretending to be dumb, consistently, convincingly, perfectly, every single day pretending to just be an animal. A real baby bird would stumble around the cage, would crash into the bars, would startle at its own reflection in the water bowl, would chirp randomly at things that caught its eye, would flinch at every single loud noise that came from just outside the door. So that is exactly what I do. With complete commitment and genuine creativity, I perform helplessness every day without exception. I stumble. I chirp at inappropriate moments. I get startled by the door. I stare blankly at my own reflection for long minutes. I perform helplessness like it is my full-time occupation, my true calling, my one genuine art form in this particular strange life. And honestly, I am genuinely, impressively good at it, better than I expected. Turns out pretending to be stupid is a real skill. Turns out that's something I apparently picked up somewhere in my previous life and carried with me intact into this new one. The court mages come to study me twice a week, every week, with their notebooks and measuring tools in quiet professional manner. They document everything with the thoroughness of people who have been told this is the most important assignment of their careers. Feather color at various stages, body temperature measured at 3 different points, internal flame brightness and color quality, whether my fire burns basic orange or the deeper red that indicates growth, or the rare white gold of full, dangerous maturity. My flames are currently a very unimpressive, very basic, very deliberately average orange. I keep them exactly that way always. Every time I feel the fire wanting to stretch itself, wanting to show what it actually is, I pull it back, keep it small, contained. The head mage is a woman named Ceres, older than the others, quieter. much slower to write things down in her leather notebook. Where the other mages take notes on everything immediately and eagerly, Ceres just watches first, sometimes for a very long time. Sharp eyes, the kind that don't miss small things. A sharper mind underneath, the kind that connects what other people miss entirely. She is the one I have to be most careful around, more careful than with the king himself, more careful than anyone in this building. One afternoon, she sits in front of my cage for 3 full hours, not writing, not speaking, not moving from her low wooden chair, just watching me with an expression I cannot fully read from inside a bird's face, trying very hard to look completely innocent. I eat my dried fruit. I groom my feathers with the slightly confused expression of a bird that doesn't fully understand grooming. I find an imaginary piece of something on my cushion and stare at it with intense, baffling concentration for about 4 solid minutes. She does not blink. I do not blink. We have a completely silent, completely unacknowledged staring contest through the golden bars. Finally, she writes something in her notebook. 3 lines, maybe 4. She looks at what she wrote, closes the notebook carefully, stands up, puts the chair back exactly where she found it, walks to the door, pauses with her hand on the frame, doesn't turn around. Then she leaves. I never find out what she wrote in those 3 or 4 lines, but the look she gave me before that door closed, it was the look of someone who has been adding up a long column of numbers and arrived at an answer that genuinely concerns them. Like, she's not entirely sure what she's looking at through these bars, but she's forming a theory, and the theory unsettles her. I file that away under very important and stay in character. Keep performing, keep watching, keep counting the passing days carefully. Weeks become months. The seasons shift outside the high windows of my room. My feathers change as the months pass, and I grow. From the fluffy, uncertain orange of a fresh hatchling to something richer and more settled and more honest about what it actually is. Deep red at the base. The kind of red that lives inside old coals right before they decide to catch fire again completely. Gold at the very tips when the morning light comes through the window at exactly the right angle. Genuinely impressive, honestly. My tail feathers come in last, long and full with a slight iridescence that shifts color when I move even slightly in the light. The palace goes a little bit wild about this. Nobody here has ever watched a phoenix develop in real time before. Nobody anywhere has. It's unprecedented. Historical. The kind of thing that ends up written in books that people study for the next several centuries. They throw a celebration the week my tail feathers fully come in. Music in the hallways outside my room for that entire evening. Laughter and wine and the sound of people toasting to something that has nothing personal to do with me and everything to do with what I represent. Kale sneaks in after the official party winds down with an extra piece of honeyed fig, wrapped carefully in a clean white cloth. He sets it through the bar, spacing and whispers, "They're celebrating you," like it's a genuinely nice gift he's delivering to me. I look at the bars of my golden cage, at the runes carved into every third link, at the 7-mechanism lock on the doorframe. I eat the fig slowly. It's excellent. Someone in the royal kitchen genuinely knows what they're doing with honey and dried fruit. I don't chirp. I don't perform anything right now. I just sit there and think about what I've been thinking about for months now. Because I've been doing a lot of thinking about what a phoenix actually is. Not the symbol, not the myth painted on a wall, not the dramatic painting of a heroic bird rising from theatrical burning ruins that hangs in the corridor near the throne room. The real thing. Every time I breathe, nothing special, just exist, I feel the fire shifting inside this body, learning the shape of it, mapping itself to my spine, my wings, the hollow bones, the whole new and unfamiliar architecture of me. It isn't a tool I carry. It isn't a weapon I can pick up and set down when I'm done with it. It is me, completely, all the way. My anger is fire. My patience is fire. My will, that's that stubborn, grinding, absolutely not giving up quality, that's fire too. All of it runs on the same fuel. All of it comes from the same deep place. And I have been feeding that place every single day, quietly, without drawing attention, without letting anyone see what's growing inside the small orange bird in the golden cage. Every stare from the king, every rune on these bars, every mage treating me like a fascinating specimen on a research shelf, every courtier who points at my cage during their palace tour and says, "Isn't it remarkable? And isn't it ours to their guests?" All of it goes into the fire. Every piece, every day, without exception. The fire doesn't forget. The fire remembers everything. But I stay patient. I've always been patient, even when I was human, and patience was a much harder quality to actually hold on to. There will come a moment, the right moment. I've always known this about myself. I just have to not waste it when it finally arrives. It comes in the form of an announcement that Kale delivers one morning with barely contained nervous energy in his entire body. King Aldrich is dying. Not slowly, not eventually. Now fast, much faster than anyone expected or had quietly prepared for. The sickness he'd been managing and hiding and quietly lying about for 2 full years has apparently stopped cooperating with him. And his son, Prince Edrin, is preparing for his coronation. The transition is beginning. Everything is changing around me now. I hear this from Kale, who heard it from the head cook, who heard it from a guard, who heard it from a royal courier at dawn. Palace gossip travels faster than official royal decrees. It always does, in every kingdom, at every point in recorded history. Edrin is 23. I know him by sight. I've had months to memorize every face that walks regularly through this palace. Strong jaw, cold eyes, the very specific kind of handsome that seems to come pre-installed with cruelty already built in from birth. He carries himself the way someone carries themselves when they've always known they would eventually inherit absolutely everything. Not arrogant exactly, more like settled, certain. The way a predator is certain about things, it doesn't need to announce itself. I've seen him come to look at me twice. He stood outside my cage the way his father does. But there was a clear, important difference. His father looked at me and saw a symbol, something sacred, something that proved his divine right to sit on the throne at all. His father genuinely believed, truly, deeply believed, that I was a blessing sent specifically to him from the gods themselves. Edrin looks at me and sees a tool, just a tool, an extremely powerful, extremely rare, extremely useful tool that needs managing. That distinction matters more than it might seem at first. A symbol you protect and preserve and keep beautiful for display. A tool you modify, you optimize, you adjust until it fits perfectly in the hand that has decided it's going to use it for something. The second time Edrin visited, he brought his chief military advisor, and they stood in front of my cage discussing me openly. Not to me, about me. The way people discuss a piece of equipment they're considering purchasing or upgrading for a specific purpose. "Can it actually fight?" Edrin asked. His voice was completely calm, curious, just gathering necessary information efficiently. His advisor said historical texts described a fully mature phoenix as capable of destroying an entire city if sufficiently provoked. Edrin nodded at that, slowly, thoughtfully, the way someone nods when they're running quiet calculations in their head about something. Then he said 4 words, 4 specific, quiet, completely final words that I have not stopped thinking about for a single second since. He said, "We'll need to make sure it can't." That was all. Said the way you discuss trimming a hedge before it grows too large. No drama, no anger, calm and practical and completely final. He turned and walked out. His advisor followed. The door closed behind them. I sat on my cushion and I thought about those 4 words, about what they meant, about what was coming because of them specifically. 3 days after that conversation, 2 mages arrive in my room carrying a set of heavy silver shears. Specialized equipment. I know exactly what those shears are for before they even finish crossing the threshold into the room. I've read enough history. Wing clipping. It's been done to captive birds since the very beginning of captive birds, and a phoenix is still technically a bird. A phoenix with clipped wings can't fly properly, can't generate the lift needed to build momentum for a full-power fire release, can't reach altitude, can't use the techniques that a mature phoenix uses to project its flame at genuinely destructive range. It's not permanent damage. Phoenixes heal fast, but it would erase months of real growth, months of building something important. But beyond the practical damage, beyond the lost months, it was a message, clearer than anything Edrin had said out loud directly. Edrin saying, "You are mine. You move when I authorize movement. You burn when I give the specific personal order to burn. You are a weapon, and weapons don't get opinions about how they're used. Weapons don't get wings that haven't been pre-approved first." I sit on my cushion and watch the 2 mages lay out their tools with the efficient calm of people who've done this kind of thing before. The fire inside me goes very, very still, not quiet in the frightened way. Quiet in the focused, decided, completely deliberate way. Not fear, something colder and more deliberate than fear. Something that has been quietly building toward exactly this moment here. Because something just clicked into place inside me. Smooth and final and absolutely clear, like a lock engaging at last and holding. The coronation is in 2 weeks, 14 days from this exact moment, 336 hours from right now. If I react right now, if I fight back in this room today, let the fire out, burn these mages and their specialized silver shears, Edrin chains me, puts me in something worse than this cage, maybe underground, maybe somewhere permanently dark and controlled. He's the kind of man who has already thought about contingencies very carefully, who has the worst option prepared and waiting. No, not today, not this moment. This is not the right moment. I know what the right moment looks like when it comes. This isn't it. I let them do it. I sit completely, perfectly still the entire time they work. I don't flinch. I don't make a sound, not once. I stare at the wall directly in front of me and I count, slowly, all the way to 100. Then I start again from the very beginning. 1, 2, 3. The shears close. 4, 5, 6. Another feather falls. 7, 8, 9. Keep counting. Stay completely still. Because I've made a decision. And once I make a decision, this was true when I was human, and it is true now as a bird, I see it through. All the way to the absolute end. Without flinching. Without second guessing. Without losing my nerve at the last second. 2 weeks. 14 days. That's all I need. And then the coronation of King Edrin I of Verith. The beginning of the end. The last coronation this kingdom will ever hold. The last time this throne room serves its intended ceremonial purpose for any king. That night, after the mages pack their tools and leave, Kale comes in for his evening routine. He stops when he sees my wings. He just stands there for a second with his cloth and his water jug completely frozen, looking at the clipped feathers, not moving. Then he sets everything down carefully. He sits on the floor outside my cage, cross-legged, back against the stone wall behind him, and he doesn't say anything for a long time. 5 minutes, maybe closer to 10, just sitting there with me in the quiet room. Eventually, "I'm sorry, I didn't know they were going to do that." Quiet. Simple. He completely means every single word of it. I look at him, not performing anything right now, not calculating. Just looking at this 14-year-old kid who didn't choose any of this, who shows up every morning before the sun rises to bring food to a bird he's not allowed to touch or name or actually know properly, who talks to me anyway every morning because he's that kind of person, who says I'm sorry when someone else does something cruel. I make a very small sound, one single chirp, softer than anything I've made in months. He looks up from the floor toward me. He gives me this sad, crooked, tired little smile that is entirely too old for a face that young. Then he goes back to his work. I've already made my decision about Kale. He leaves this palace before the coronation happens. I'll work out the specific how later. But he walks out of here in one piece, unharmed, with enough of a head start that none of what's coming touches him at all. That's completely non-negotiable. That's decided and filed and absolutely closed. It is the one thing I will not compromise on. Unlike everything that is coming for everyone who gave this specific order for those silver shears. That part is also fully decided. The fire in my chest settles back into its slow, rhythmic, completely controlled burn. Patient, contained. Larger than this room. 14 days. I've been waiting far longer than 14 days already. 14 days is nothing. It's a single held breath. I sit on my velvet cushion in my golden cage with my clipped wings and my hidden fire, and I count every day deliberately. 1, 2, 3. Outside, the palace begins preparing for the coronation. Banners are ordered from the eastern workshops urgently. Guest lists are drafted by the dozen. Ceremonies are rehearsed in empty halls. The kitchen begins planning the massive feast menu. 4, 5, 6. A throne is polished to a mirror finish. A crown is cleaned and placed under careful guard in the inner treasury. Nobody stops to ask the bird in the cage what it thinks about any of this. Nobody ever has. That has always been their first mistake. 7, 8, 9, 10. My clipped feathers begin to grow back. Slowly and unevenly, but they grow. Phoenixes heal faster than expected. Kale notices on the 8th day. He's the one paying close enough attention to catch the change, because of course he is. Of course. He doesn't say a word about it. He just looks deliberately away, refills my bowl without comment, and leaves a little faster. I think he might be starting to understand what's actually happening here. I think, given everything, that might actually be okay. 11, 12, 13. The night before the coronation, the palace is alive with noise and energy and completely purposeful movement. Torches lit in every corridor from floor to ceiling. Staff running back and forth with flowers and linens and food for overnight guests. The sound of military boots on stone as guards take their new positions. Edrin's positions now, not his father's, not anymore. I sit in the dark of my room. Nobody thought to light a single candle for me tonight, which is honestly a little funny in retrospect. And I listen to the whole palace rearranging itself around its new owner. And I feel the fire. And I think carefully about tomorrow, about what I've decided to do, about what I know this body can do when it finally, genuinely, completely stops holding itself back. About that brief test in my first week here when I flared just slightly to understand the real parameters of what I'm working with. The temperature in the entire eastern wing went up 14 degrees from that one small, restrained, carefully controlled test pulse. Sarah circled that number 3 times in her leather notebook and sent an urgent report upstairs before the day was even finished. That was me at maybe 8 or 10% of what I actually am. Still learning this body, still finding the true edges of it. Tomorrow, I won't be performing anything at all. Tomorrow, I don't hold a single thing back. Not one breath, not one flame. Tomorrow a new king sits on his throne and makes his first royal proclamation and greets his court and receives their sworn oaths. And tomorrow a phoenix decides it is completely done waiting, done pretending, done performing someone else's symbol for their benefit. I don't sleep that night. I sit and breathe and let the fire do what it has been waiting through months of patience to finally do. Let it grow into every part of this body, into the hollow bones and the wingtips and the space between each slow, careful breath. Let it remember what it actually is. Let it finally stop pretending to be something smaller and safer and easier for people to accept. The morning comes the way mornings come on days that matter. The same as every other morning, which feels almost offensive, honestly. The sun comes through the high windows at the exact same angle it always does. The garden birds make the exact same familiar sounds. Cale arrives earlier than usual today. He's wearing the formal version of the uniform. Someone important will be watching the servants. He brings the food, changes the water. He doesn't talk, which is the one consistent thing he always does. The absence is very loud. When he reaches through the bar, spacing to set down the food bowl, his hand stays there 1 second longer than it actually needs to. I look at his hand, then up at his face. He's looking somewhere past me, at the wall behind me, not at me directly, not right now. The ceremony starts at midday, he says, very quietly. Then he pulls his hand back and picks up his jug and walks to the door. He stops, one hand on the door frame, in the exact same spot where Saris always pauses. I notice that because I notice everything. I put a note under a stone, he says to the door without turning around. Outside the east kitchen, for my sister, just in case. Then he is gone and the door closes. I eat my food and I think, he figured it out. He's 14 and he already handled himself. I finish the fig. I sit very still and listen to the palace filling up with the sounds of a coronation getting ready to begin. Trumpets from somewhere near the main ceremonial hall. The deep resonance of a large bell struck 3 slow times. Crowds gathering. Hundreds of people finding their assigned positions, taking their seats, preparing to witness what they believe will be history today. They're right about that part, at least. They are absolutely going to witness history. Just not the carefully planned and rehearsed kind. The fire in my chest is enormous now. Bigger than this room, bigger than this cage, bigger than the palace if I'm being completely honest. Kept small for so long, kept orange and manageable and completely unthreatening. And now finally allowed to be what it actually is. I let it rise up into my wings, both of them at once. Even the clipped feathers glow fully when the fire moves through them completely. Cut doesn't mean dead, not for Phoenix. The fire doesn't need perfect feathers. It needs the Phoenix to mean it. And I mean it. Every part of me means it. Every day of patience means it. Every counted hour means it. Every rune on every bar means it. All of it, red, then gold, then the white gold that made Cirrus circle a single number 3 times in her notebook because it genuinely worried her. The bars of the cage are hot now. The protective runes engraved into the gold are doing exactly what they were designed to do. They hold, they hold, they hold. And then they reach the absolute edge of what they were built and paid for to handle. And after that point, gold is just gold. Gold melts at 1,064 degrees Celsius. I'm running much hotter than that. The bars come apart slowly, almost gently, the way something gives up an argument it was never actually going to win in the long run. The door to my room doesn't swing open. It melts, which is significantly faster and, honestly, considerably more satisfying entirely. I step out into the corridor, into open air. No bars on either side, no runes underneath my feet, just the hallway and the world. I take one full breath in that open space and let the fire expand to its real, natural size for the very first time since I hatched. From deep in the palace, in the direction of the main ceremonial hall, a trumpet sounds the official opening of the coronation ceremony. The coronation of King Edrin I of Vareth is officially, formally, and ceremonially beginning on schedule without me. I spread my wings, half-grown, clipped at the edges, and absolutely on fire from the base to every visible tip. And I move. I remember every single day in that cage. Every morning Cale changed my water in the dark before sunrise and talked to me quietly. Every stare from the king through the bars. Every afternoon, Saris sat in her chair and watched and wrote her 3 lines and paused. Every rune on every bar. Every moment I chose patience over instinct and waiting over the fire that wanted out of me every single day. I remember all of it. I'm carrying all of it with me right now down this corridor, moving toward the sound of that opening trumpet. If you think you know what happens when a phoenix who has been waiting for 14 months finally walks into a coronation uninvited, if you think you know what fire that's been fed on patience and quiet anger and every small daily indignity looks like when it gets out, stay right here, because it is about to start. And I promise you, this is absolutely not what they planned for today's ceremony. The hallway is empty. Obviously, it's empty. Every single person in this palace is in the throne room right now waiting for history. They're all watching the door where Adrian is supposed to walk in. Nobody thought to watch the door where I would walk out. That's the thing about being underestimated for 14 months. People stop checking on the thing they think they already control. My wings are on fire, not metaphorically. Literally on fire, from the clipped tips all the way down to where they meet my back. The clipped feathers glow red-white, the way metal glows right before it changes into something completely different from what it was. The corridor stretches ahead of me, stone floors, tapestries on the walls, torches burning in their iron holders along both sides. Everything in this hallway is about to get considerably hotter than its designers intended. I give it maybe 30 seconds. I move fast, not running, gliding low to the floor, wings half spread, the fire creating enough lift that I barely touch the stone. This is the first time I've moved freely in 14 months. The first time I've crossed a floor without bars on either side. It feels... I don't have the right words for it. It feels like remembering a language you spoke before you had language at all. The first tapestry catches without me touching it. The heat radiating off my wings is enough. It just decides to be fire. I notice this, and I don't slow down. The tapestry was always going to catch. Everything in this hallway was always going to catch. There are 2 guards at the first intersection. They see me coming before I see them. They hear the fire before they see the light. One of them shouts something. The other one reaches for his weapon. Both of them are doing exactly what they were trained to do. I respect that. I genuinely do. These are men doing their jobs. Which is why I aim the first pulse of heat at the floor between them. Not at them. Between them. The stone cracks. The heat blooms upward. Both men stumble backward, and I move through the gap they leave. I'm not here for guards. Guards are just people who were assigned a post and didn't know what was coming. I'm not interested in them. I'm here for the throne room. I'm here for the moment Adrian's crown touches his head and the kingdom declares itself his. I want to be there for that exact moment. I want him to see me. I want the first thing his reign witnesses to be this. The second corridor is longer. There are more torches, which means more fuel, which means the fire I'm trailing is getting larger. By the time I reach the end of this corridor, the ceiling is going to be fully involved. I note this as a practical matter. I hear voices ahead, lots of them. The low, ceremonial murmur of a room full of people performing the ritual of witnessing a power. I know this sound. Every kingdom has a version of it, the specific hush that happens when everyone is pretending to be reverent. There are 2 more guards at the doors to the throne room, heavy doors. Reinforced oak, iron fittings, ceremonial carvings. The doors are closed. The guards see me coming from 20 feet away, and their training takes over immediately and completely. They cross their spears. They plant their feet. They do everything correctly. They are good guards doing a very difficult job. The problem is that spears don't do much to a fire that's burning hotter than the sun's outer atmosphere by this point. I don't even slow down. The spears don't matter. The guards jump aside, good instinct, correctly executed, and I hit the doors. The doors don't open. The doors turn into the concept of doors very briefly and then become something else entirely, something simpler. And then I am inside the throne room of Verith, trailing fire with 200 people staring at me in absolute total silence. Let me describe what 200 people look like when something they did not plan for walks through the wall where the door used to be. Every face in the room turns at the same moment. It's genuinely impressive, the synchronization of it, like a single organism. The nobles in their formal clothes, the military commanders in their dress uniforms, the foreign dignitaries in their strange colors, the court mages in their robes. I see Saris in the second row on the left. She has already taken 3 steps backward. Smart woman. The priests near the altar, the musicians who were playing something stately and appropriate and are now very definitely not playing. Every single one of them looking at me. At the fire I'm trailing, at the doors I just walked through that are no longer doors, and at the far end of the room, at the top of the steps leading to the throne, standing in his coronation robes. Edrin. He is the only person in the room who hasn't moved. He's just standing there, crown in the hands of the priest beside him, not frozen with fear. I want to be clear about that. He's standing still because he's chosen to stand still. That's different. He's looking at me the way he looked at me in my cage, like I'm a piece of equipment that has malfunctioned. Inconveniently, there's a very long silence. The kind of silence that has texture to it, the kind you can feel against your skin. And then, because I have been waiting 14 months for this specific moment, I take one slow breath and I speak out loud for the first time. A phoenix can speak. Not many people know this because not many phoenixes have been kept captive long enough to feel like talking. My voice, the first time I use it in this life, comes out as something between a sound and a feeling, warm, resonant, completely certain. Put the crown down, I say. That's all. Just that. 3 words. Directed at Edrin, at the priest, at everyone in this room. The priest nearly drops the crown. Multiple people in the crowd make sounds. Someone near the back faints, I think. I hear it. Edrin does not put the crown down. He also doesn't speak. He just looks at me with those cold, calculating, assessing eyes. And I understand what he's doing. He's running through his options. He's fast. I'll give him that. He's already thinking clearly. I was the symbol of his father's divine right. If I'm now openly opposing his coronation, that's a serious political problem. If he tries to force the ceremony through, he looks weak. If he tries to fight me, he might die. If he runs, he definitely loses. He's stuck. I've stuck him completely and deliberately, and after 14 months of careful planning, it feels exactly as good as I expected. You had my wings clipped, I say. Still calm, still certain. My voice carries to every corner of the room without any effort. You looked at me through bars and decided I was a weapon, and the first thing you wanted to do was make sure I couldn't fly. That was your first act as the power behind this throne, before the crown, before the oaths, before any of the ceremony. I let that sit in the room for a moment. I watch it land on the faces of the assembled court. I watch some of them understand. The nobles who didn't know about the wing clipping, and there are several, I can see it happening in their expressions, are recalculating. A phoenix is sacred in this kingdom, has been for 300 years of myth and legend and religious iconography. Everybody knows this. A king who clips the wings of a sacred phoenix before his coronation is not a king who expects the gods to approve of his reign. Edrin finally speaks. His voice is controlled. Impressive, honestly, given the circumstances. You are property of the crown. You were given the finest care, the finest food. You were protected, maintained, kept safe from a world that would have used you worse. What I had done to your wings was a practical measure, a temporary measure. You were not harmed. You are not harmed now. Every word technically accurate. Every word completely missing the point. He's good at this. The language of ownership dressed as care. I was not harmed, I agree. And I watch his face shift slightly. He thinks he's found ground to stand on. He hasn't. I was caged. Now, there's a difference between being harmed and being caged. Your father understood one half of that distinction. You don't understand either half. I move forward. Not fast, deliberately slowly, so every person in this room can see me moving and choose to get out of the way. The crowd parts. Obviously, the crowd parts. Fire tends to encourage that. The nobles nearest me press back against the walls. I move through the center of the room, down the ceremonial aisle, past the pews of the assembled court, toward the steps of the throne. Edrin watches me come. He still hasn't moved. The priest beside him has taken the crown and moved a considerable distance away. The military commanders near the front are looking at each other. The very specific look of people trying to decide if intervening is survivable. It isn't. I know it isn't. They know it isn't on some instinctive level, even if they haven't fully processed why yet. I reach the base of the steps. I stop there. I look up at Edrin on his platform, in his robes, without his crown. I wait. What do you want? He asks. Still controlled, still thinking. The voice of a man who believes everything has a negotiable resolution. And I think about that question. What do I want? It's a fair question, honestly. I've been planning this moment for months, but I realize, standing here in this throne room with fire behind me and a kingdom watching, that what I want is quite simple. I want you to understand what you actually had, I say. Not what you thought you had, not what your father told you you had. Your father had a symbol, a creature from prophecy that chose to hatch inside his walls. He built his entire reign on that story. He was wrong about what I was, but he was right about one thing. I'm not property. I've never been property, not for one day. You were going to clip my wings and put me in a war and call it the will of the gods, and none of this was ever going to work. I take one more step up. Just one. I'm not trying to reach him. I'm trying to make sure he can see my eyes clearly. He needs to see this. This kingdom has 3 choices, I say, loud enough now for every person in the room to hear clearly without any effort at all. First choice, you continue this coronation. You put on your crown, and I burn this throne room down to the foundation stones today. A ripple through the crowd. Physical. People actually moving. A wave of bodies pressing back toward the walls and the exits. Second choice, you leave. You leave this palace, you leave this kingdom, you take whatever matters to you personally, and you go. And Vareth figures out what it is without a king who thinks divine symbols are weapons to be managed and optimized and clipped. There's a sound from the crowd now. Not panic. Something more complicated than panic. The sound of people doing sudden math. Some of them are calculating the value of the first option. Some are calculating the cost of the second. Nobody's asking about the third yet. I let them wait for it. I've had 14 months to think about how to do this moment. I'm not rushing the ending. Third choice, I say. And this is the one I would actually recommend, for practical reasons as much as anything else. You sit down, all of you, and we talk about what this kingdom is going to be, now that the thing you kept in a cage can speak. The silence after that is different from the silence at the beginning. This one has weight moving in it. This one is thinking. Edrin stares at me for a very long time. I stare back. This is familiar. I've been staring back at people in this palace for months. I am very good at staring back. 14 months of practice. I could do this indefinitely. I have nowhere else to be right now. Finally, something shifts in his face. Not submission. I don't expect submission from a man like Edrin, and I'm not asking for it. Something more like recalculation. The look of someone who came into a room with one plan and is now running the numbers on a different plan. You said we talk, he says slowly. What does a phoenix actually want to talk about with a king whose coronation it just interrupted? Well, what a phoenix wants is actually a more interesting question than you think, I say. And the answer is going to surprise you. I watch him decide. It takes about 10 seconds. This is a man who makes decisions fast. That's one of the things that makes him dangerous. Clear the room, he says. Not to me, to the court, to the commanders, the nobles, the priests, the diplomats, the musicians. People start moving. Not all of them want to. Several of the nobles look like they very much want to stay and witness whatever this is. Ceres, I notice, is the last one moving toward the exit. She pauses near the door and looks at me. That same look from her chair, adding up numbers, arriving at an answer. But this time the expression is different. This time I think the answer interests her. I file that away. I file everything away. Old habit. The door closes behind the last of them and the throne room is quiet and empty. Just me. Just Edrin. Just the fire still crackling in the tapestries along the walls, cheerfully consuming several centuries of art. He sits down on the throne steps, which is a small interesting choice. Not on the throne itself, on the steps below it. I notice that. I settle onto the floor in front of him, wings folded, fire banked down to something manageable. Warm, but not actively melting things. Talk, he says. No ceremony, no title. Just the word. That's actually the right approach, and I respect it slightly against my will. Your father's reign was built on a story, I say. The phoenix chose Vareth. The gods approved. The kingdom was blessed and special. That story held this kingdom together through 2 bad harvests, a border dispute, and a succession that half the court didn't want. Stories like that are genuinely useful. I'm not saying your father was stupid for building on it. He wasn't. He was pragmatic. But the story required me to be what I wasn't. It required a sacred bird that just sat in a cage and glowed and proved a point. And when you took over, you decided that wasn't enough. You wanted a weapon. And the cage and the story both stopped working at once. Edrin is listening. Actually listening, not waiting for an opening. That's something. Not everything, but something to work with. What are you? He asks. Simple question. Direct. The kind of question only someone genuinely curious asks when they could be defensive. I was human, I say. Before this. I don't know how or why. I woke up in your father's zoo with no explanation and no instruction manual. I've spent 14 months learning this body, learning this kingdom, and deciding what I actually want to do with whatever this is. I pause. Because what I'm about to say is true, and I haven't said it out loud before, and saying it out loud makes it more real. I don't want to burn your kingdom down, I say. I want to see what it becomes when it stops being organized around keeping me caged. That lands differently than he expected. I can see it. A small adjustment somewhere behind those cold, calculating eyes. You had options, he says. You could have left. The bars melted. You showed us that. You could have simply flown away this morning. It's a fair point. And it's the point I've been thinking about since about day 30 in that cage, so I have an answer ready. I could have, I agree. I thought about it. I spent probably 3 weeks thinking about nothing except flying away and never coming back. But here's the thing about a kingdom that captures a phoenix and builds its identity around owning something sacred and unownable. It doesn't stop. The next thing it finds, it cages. The next creature, the next person, the next small nation that can't fight back. Your father's story was about the gods approving of Vareth, but what the story actually taught was that power means possession. And the next king, you took that lesson and skipped the sacred part entirely and went straight to powerful things must be controlled. I let that sit. I watch him processing it. He's smart enough to see where this is going, and honest enough not to immediately argue. So what? He says. You stay. You do what exactly? You lecture the court on ethics. You sit on the council. You burn things you disagree with. Roughly, I say, with significant adjustments depending on how the first few months of this arrangement actually go in practice. The first almost smile crosses his face. It's gone in less than a second, but I see it, and I file it away under interesting. You're describing a partnership, he says, with a king who just tried to clip your wings. That's an unusual negotiating position. I'm describing a choice, I say. You can spend your reign building something worth keeping, or you can spend it trying to control fire. And the first option requires my cooperation, and the second option requires you to be considerably more powerful than you currently are. He looks at me for a long time after that. The throne room is quiet, except for the fire I've left in the walls, still working through the art. I should probably mention at this point that I genuinely wasn't certain which option he'd choose. I had a read on him, but reads are not certainties. Edrin is his father's son in some ways. Pragmatic, organized, willing to build on whatever works. But he's also colder, more efficient. There was a real possibility he'd choose option 2. Leave. Let someone else inherit the smoking remains of this particular conversation. Or option 1. Call my bluff, see if I'd actually burn the throne room with him in it. He didn't know I wouldn't. Honestly, neither did I. But he sits there on the steps of his throne in his coronation robes with no crown on his head, and he makes the third choice. I have conditions of my own, he says. Not arguing, just stating a fact that he clearly intends to be taken seriously. I have conditions too, I say. That's exactly what a negotiation is. 2 parties, 2 sets of requirements, 1 outcome they can both survive. And that is how the coronation of Idrin I of Vareth happened, without a crown, without a ceremony, without a priest. In an empty throne room with the tapestries still burning on the walls, just 2 people deciding what a kingdom is for. I want to be clear, this was not the end of anything. This was the beginning of something considerably more complicated, because making a deal with Edrin was not the same as trusting Edrin, and both of us understood that completely from the start. He was still the man who had ordered my wings clipped, who had looked at me and said, "We need to make sure it can't." And I was still a phoenix who had just melted his throne room doors and delivered an ultimatum to an assembled royal court. Neither of us was under any illusions about what the other was. That was actually the foundation of whatever this was going to be. What we agreed to, in the broadest terms, was this. Edrin would rule Vareth. I would not be caged or claimed or called property. I would remain in the kingdom, by choice, my choice, revocable at any time for any reason I deemed sufficient, as something new, not a symbol, not a weapon, not a pet, something the kingdom didn't have a word for yet, which meant we'd have to make one. In exchange, I would not burn the city, which was frankly a fairly low bar, but Edrin seemed to consider it a reasonable starting point. The specific terms took 3 hours to work out, during which the burning tapestries in the walls became a significant topic of conversation. Edrin sent for water. I pointed out that water and phoenix fire interact in a way that makes things considerably worse, not better. He sent for sand instead. The sand worked. By the time we'd finished talking, the throne room was smoky but structurally intact. The court, waiting outside in various states of terror and fascination, was eventually allowed back in to hear the result. Edrin stood in front of his throne, still no crown, which I noticed nobody commented on, and announced what had been decided. The phoenix was not property of the crown, had never been property of the crown. That designation had been in error from the beginning. The phoenix was He paused here, visibly, because we had discussed this word at length, a sovereign presence within Vareth's borders. An independent party with whom the crown had entered into a bilateral arrangement of mutual benefit and recognized autonomy. You could hear the court trying to process this, the sound of 200 people doing very fast political calculations simultaneously. Saris was watching me from the left side of the room. I met her eyes. She gave me a single, small, very controlled nod. Just once. I thought about what she might have written in her notebook during those 3-hour observation sessions. I thought I might finally know. After the announcement, after the court dispersed in the very specific way courts disperse when they have a great deal to discuss quietly, Edrin came to stand near me, not close, a respectful distance, still calculating, still that cold assessment running behind his eyes. "You said you were human before," he said. Not a question, the tone of someone returning to something they filed away for later. "I did say that," I said, "and I meant it. I remember the whole thing, including the parts that are harder to talk about clearly." "That means you remember what it was like," he said carefully. "To be caged, as a person, before the wings and the fire and all of this." He said it carefully, not cruelly, like someone laying a stone on a scale to see how the other side moves, testing whether I'd engage. "It means I remember what it was like to be small," I said, "and to watch the people in charge of the cage tell themselves it was care." He nodded. "Once?" The same controlled nod Saris had given me from a completely different direction. "Same meaning, though. I'm going to make mistakes," he said, "in how I think about you, in what I assume. I'm telling you in advance because I'd rather you tell me than burn something." "That is an unusually self-aware thing to say," I told him. "Most people don't announce their blind spots before they've even demonstrated them." "I've had about 3 hours to think about what happens if I'm not," he said. Looking at the walls helped concentrate my thinking. This, I decided, was something I could actually work with. Not trust, not yet. Maybe not ever fully, not with this man, but something real. I had come into this throne room this morning to make a point and burn a cage down and refuse to be owned by anyone ever again. I had not come in expecting to walk out with something that might, with considerable effort and mutual suspicion, become useful. But here I was, standing in a smoky throne room with a king who had just publicly declared me unownable, working out the details. My wings were still half-grown. The clipped feathers were regrowing, but not there yet. I could feel the edges of them, ragged and new. The fire in my chest was still enormous. All that stored patience finally given somewhere to go, still finding its edges. I thought about Cale, about the note he'd left under a stone outside the east kitchen for his sister. Just in case. I needed to find him. Find him and tell him the just in case wasn't necessary. That he could come back if he wanted. Or not. His choice. His choice. I kept coming back to that phrase. His choice. My choice. Choices made freely versus roles assigned without asking. Maybe that was the thing I actually wanted to build here. The thing worth staying for. The thing worth not burning down. A place where the difference between those two things, chosen and assigned, was treated like it genuinely mattered. Not because it would be easy. Edrin was not going to suddenly become someone who understood freedom as an instinct rather than a concept. And the court was not going to overnight stop thinking in terms of power and possession and what belongs to whom and why. But I had 14 months of patience stored up, and I had fire that remembered everything it had ever been fed. And for the very first time since I woke up damp and confused in that golden cage, I was genuinely, freely choosing where to put all of it. Outside, through the high windows of the throne room, I could see the sky, wide and open and completely indifferent to all of this. The same sky that had been outside my cage window every morning when Cale came in before sunrise to change my water and talk to me. I had looked at that sky every day for 14 months. I had memorized the exact color it went at dawn, at noon, at the moment before dark. I had filed it away the way I filed away everything. Guard schedules, lock mechanisms, which walls were thinnest. But looking at it now, from here, without bars between me and it looked completely different. Obvious that. Still true. Edrin was watching me look at the sky. He said nothing. He was learning, I thought. Learning when to stay quiet. That was something. I need to find the boy, I said. The one who was assigned to my cage. His name is Cale. He left this morning. I need to know he's safe. I'll send someone, Edrin said immediately. No hesitation. The tone of a man who understood that this was not optional. I'll go myself, I said. I want to see him in person. After we finish whatever still needs finishing here in this room. There are still things to finish in this room, he asked, looking around at the smoke-stained walls with something close to wry acknowledgement. You still don't have a crown on your head, I said, and you still have a court full of people who don't know what just happened. I watched him process the implication. And then, there it was again. That same almost smile, faster this time, easier, still gone quickly. You are actually going to help me manage this, he said slowly, the tone of someone testing a sentence out loud to see if it holds its shape. I'm going to help you explain what this kingdom is now, I said. That's different. You manage it, I just refuse to be managed. And what is this kingdom now? He asked. The question of someone who genuinely wants an answer, not someone filling silence. I thought about it. About 14 months in a cage, about fire that remembers everything it eats, about choices freely made. Somewhere genuinely interesting, and I said, if you can manage not to ruin it in the first 6 months of trying. That's my honest assessment. He looked at me for a moment, and then he turned toward the door where his court was waiting. He straightened his robes without the crown. Come on then, he said. Like it was simple. Like this was a normal thing that happened in throne rooms on coronation days. I followed him toward the door. And somewhere in this palace, probably near the east kitchen, there was a boy named Cale reading his own note, realizing that the just-in-case hadn't been necessary, that the fire had gone exactly where I'd aimed it, that he could breathe now. I spread my wings, half-grown, regrowing, still trailing wisps of white gold flame at the tips, and I followed the king out the door. The court filed back in slowly, the way people file back into a room that has recently been on fire and may be on fire again soon. They took their positions, formally, carefully, with the specific posture of people performing normalcy under difficult conditions. Edrin stood at the front of the room, robes immaculate despite everything, hands clasped behind his back in the exact same stance his father used. I noticed that. The inherited posture. The way certain things get passed down without anyone deciding to pass them, just absorbed from proximity. The crown was still in the hands of the priest, who looked like he very much wanted instructions about what to do with it. Edrin looked at the priest, then at the crown, then at the assembled court. Then he said something I did not anticipate. "We're going to do something different today," he said. "The traditional ceremony is postponed. We'll reconvene in 3 days." A murmur through the court. Not panic. Confusion, which is different. Confusion leaves space for management. Panic doesn't. "In 3 days," Edrin continued, "we will hold a ceremony that reflects the actual nature of this kingdom's current situation." Nobody asked what the actual nature of the kingdom's current situation was. Everyone in the room already knew, because I was standing there. I was standing off to the side of the room, wings folded, fire banked to a low glow, watching Edrin work the room in real time. And I'll say this for him. He was good at it. The posture, the voice, the careful pacing of information that kept people listening. He'd grown up watching his father do this, and his father had held a court for 30 years through difficult circumstances. It showed. "The arrangements that have governed this kingdom's relationship with the Phoenix are being revised," Edrin said. "Substantially." He used the word arrangements and not ownership. I noticed that. He had listened to what I said. He was already adjusting his language. That was interesting. That was actually more interesting than the formal content of what he was saying, if I was being honest. A man who adjusts his language when given new information is a different kind of problem than a man who doesn't. More manageable. More dangerous. After the announcement, people needed to talk to Edrin. Obviously. A disrupted coronation generates a significant volume of questions. The foreign dignitaries especially. 3 of them lined up with the specific energy of people calculating diplomatic implications at speed. I stood near the back of the room and watched. Nobody approached me directly. A few people looked at me from careful distances. Ceres was the exception. She crossed the room and stopped about 6 feet away and looked at me with that analytical expression. "You've been planning this since the first week," she said. Not a question, not accusatory, just stating a conclusion she'd reached. "Second week," I said. "The first week I was still figuring out the body. The second week I started thinking about long-term options." She nodded. That same single-controlled nod. The nod of someone who is updating a model they've been building for a long time. "The flame-bearing iron bowl test," she said, "on the 3rd visit, when you let the flame temperature drop precisely as I leaned closer." "I was curious what you'd write down," I said. "You had a look on your face that I wanted to understand. I spent 3 days thinking about it. I wrote that either this Phoenix had deliberate control beyond any recorded specimen, or I was misreading the instruments," she said. "And then the next visit, I set up slightly different instruments, and you let the temperature drop again at the same moment in the same way." "Consistent," I said, which is a word that means either very disciplined or completely honest. I was aiming for it to read as both. "Exactly consistent," she said, "which meant deliberate, which meant something was thinking behind those eyes." She paused. I almost said something. "Why didn't you say something at the time?" I asked. "You had months. You had access to the king. You could have said something long before today." She looked at me for a moment. "Because I didn't know what I was looking at, and I've learned to wait until I do before I speak." "That is a genuinely excellent policy," I said. I had a version of it myself, from a slightly different position, and with more fire involved. "It's kept me employed through 3 administrations," she said dryly. "The previous head mage said everything he thought immediately." "Where is the previous head mage now, exactly?" I asked. "I want to know if saying everything you think immediately ends badly, or just differently." "Farming," she said. "He's apparently very happy. Better hours." A pause. "What do you actually need from this arrangement?" The question was direct, and I appreciated it. Not what are you? Not what do you want in abstract terms, but what do you actually need? "Access," I said, "to information, to the parts of this kingdom I've never been allowed to see from inside a cage. And oversight," I added. "Someone who notices when the arrangement starts drifting back toward the previous arrangement. Someone like a court mage," she said. "Still neutral, still analytical, still that careful measuring quality in every word. Someone with genuinely sharp eyes," I said. "And the specific habit of waiting until she actually understands what she's looking at before she speaks." Another pause came between us, longer than the ones before it. She was running numbers again. I could see it happening. I let her run them completely. "There will need to be a formal role," she said finally. "Something the court can recognize as a defined position with defined responsibilities." "I was thinking something like senior advisor," I said. "Ceres, senior advisor to the crown on matters of unusual significance." "Unusual significance," she repeated. The smallest possible smile. "That's a very generous scope of responsibility." "It needs to be," I said. "The situation calls for a generous scope, as I think we both observed this morning." She looked across the room at Edrin, still managing 3 foreign dignitaries with his father's posture and his own cold precision. "He is going to be genuinely difficult to work with," she said. The considered opinion of someone who had been watching him closely for years. He's going to be complicated, I corrected. There's a difference. Difficult means resistant. Complicated means interesting. You sound almost hopeful about all of this, she said. Like the word hopeful surprised her slightly, applied to this situation and this morning. I've been sitting in a cage for 14 months, feeding fire on patients, I said. Hopeful is a reasonable next step. She considered that for a long enough moment that I thought she might not answer. Then, I will need to think carefully about the formal role definition. Take whatever time you need, I said. I have gotten extremely good at waiting over the past 14 months. It turns out it's a learnable skill. She almost smiled again. Then she turned and walked back toward the cluster of mages near the far wall who had been watching us from a distance. I watched her go and thought about what she'd said, the consistent temperature drop, the updated instruments, almost saying something. She'd been 3 weeks away from figuring it out on her own, maybe 2. I'd been operating on borrowed time and hadn't known it. That was useful information. Not alarming. The outcome was the same either way, but useful for understanding what I was working with. Saris was not going to be manageable in the way Edrin might be manageable. She was going to be a genuine partner or a genuine problem. I had a read on which way that was going to go. I'd had a read for about 6 months, actually, and so far the read was holding. By the time the room had cleared out and Edrin had finished with the dignitaries and the most pressing of the court's questions, the afternoon light was coming through the high windows at the angle that, in my cage, had always meant Kale would be starting the evening routine. I thought about that. About the way time had structured itself around those routines for 14 months. Water? Food? Talk? The absence of that structure now felt strange. Not bad. Just strange. The way a room feels strange when furniture you stop noticing is gone. I need to find Kale, I said to Edrin, when he finally crossed the now empty throne room and came to stand near me by the high windows. I sent 3 people to look, he said. No sign yet. The East Kitchen Stone had a note, as you predicted. The note is gone. He read it, and he moved, I said. Good. That means he's sensible. He'll be somewhere between here and wherever his sister is. We'll find him, Edrin said. Something in his voice that I analyzed briefly and concluded was genuine. He understood why it mattered. We also need to talk about the cage, I said, once that conversation had a natural pause. About what to do with the room now that I'm not in it. Edrin was quiet for a moment, looking at me with that careful, calculating expression. Then, what do you want to do with it, specifically? I want to leave it, I said. Exactly as it is. Melted bars and all. I want people to be able to walk through it. He looked at me for a moment. I could see him processing the why behind the answer, working out the logic and the message it would send. Because a cage that can be walked through isn't a cage anymore, I said. It's a reminder. And this kingdom needs the reminder. He nodded slowly. This wasn't the controlled, deliberate single nod I'd seen before. This was more gradual, more thoughtful, working through implications. The choice is going to make a significant number of people in this court deeply and personally uncomfortable, he said. Not arguing, just noting. Good, I said. Comfortable people don't think about what they're comfortable with. Uncomfortable people ask questions. Outside, the sun was moving toward the late afternoon position. The day that had started with a coronation was ending as something else. The kingdom of Verith had woken up this morning with a clear sense of what it was and what it intended to become. It was going to bed tonight, considerably less certain, which was uncomfortable and necessary, and I thought probably the right direction. In 3 days, there would be a different kind of ceremony. What kind exactly was still being figured out. That was okay. I had been patient for 14 months. I could be patient for 3 more days. I was getting quite good at knowing when to wait. The fire in my chest had settled into something steadier and smaller than the enormous force of the morning. Not gone, just appropriate. The right size for the right moment. That, I thought, was probably the most important thing a phoenix could learn about its own fire. Not how to make it larger, not how to keep it burning longest, but how to make it the right size for what the moment actually needs. I didn't know yet if this was going to work. The arrangement with Edrin, the slow, complicated project of changing what this kingdom was. But I had walked into a coronation this morning with 14 months of stored fire and walked out with something worth keeping. That was more than I'd had yesterday. And tomorrow, if I was careful and patient and didn't burn anything that didn't need burning, tomorrow might have more in it than today did. And the day after that might have more still. And the one after that, building on what came before. Kale was somewhere out there, reading his own note, realizing the just in case hadn't been necessary after all. The cage was empty. The bars were melted. The crown was in a priest's hands waiting for a ceremony that would mean something different. And I was standing in a smoky throne room at the end of a very long first day of something I didn't have a name for yet. Which was fine. That was completely fine. Names come later in every story worth telling. First, you build the thing, then you decide what to call it. I spread my wings, half-grown, regrowing at the clipped edges, trailing the last wisps of white gold fire. And I looked at the sky, wide and open and completely indifferent. The same sky it had always been. The same sky I had watched through cage bars every morning. It looked the same. It felt completely different. Same sky, different bird. Everything changed and everything still ahead. 3 days is a short time to rebuild what a kingdom thinks it is. I know this. Edrin knows this. We both pretend otherwise anyway. In the morning after the coronation that wasn't, I wake up in a room they've given me on the east side of the palace. Not the cage room. A different room, larger, with a window that actually opens, which I tested 4 times before I slept. It opens. It opens fully, wide enough to fly through. I tested it 4 times because I needed to know. Old habit. File everything. The room has a bed I don't use, a table, 2 chairs, and a fireplace that hasn't been lit because everyone assumes I don't need one. They're right, technically. But there's something about a lit fireplace that feels like company, and I've been alone for 14 months. I light it myself. The fire in the hearth recognizes the fire in me and settles into something comfortable and mutual and quietly warm. I sit in front of it until the palace starts making its morning sounds. Boots on stone, doors, the kitchen starting its work. Kale hasn't been found yet. Edrin's people are looking. I'm told they're thorough. I'm choosing to believe that for now. The first official thing on my schedule, and yes, there is a schedule. Edrin produced it the night before with characteristic efficiency, is a meeting with the court council. 12 people who run the various operations of the kingdom and report directly to the crown. Edrin asked me to attend, not as a guest, not as a curiosity, as a participant, as whatever the new title turns out to be. I walk into the council chamber at the appointed hour. 12 faces turn toward me with 12 different expressions. Caution, curiosity, calculation. One man in the back left corner has an expression I'd describe as aggressive neutrality. I note him. Edrin is already seated at the head of the table. He looks like a man who has slept 3 hours and doesn't intend to mention it. This is the Phoenix, he says to the council. Not our Phoenix, not the Phoenix, just the Phoenix. He's already adjusting language. The arrangement that defined the Phoenix's presence in this kingdom has been revised. The specifics are being formalized. In the interim, the Phoenix will be present at council meetings as an observer and occasional advisor. Treat the input accordingly. 12 people processing 12 different versions of what accordingly means. I settle into the empty chair at the far end of the table. The man with aggressive neutrality. I learn his name is Lord Harvin, Treasury. Clears his throat. With respect, he begins. Every sentence that starts with respect is about to contain none. I've noticed this in every language I've ever heard it in. With respect, can we establish what authority the Phoenix's input actually carries for the purposes of council procedure? It's a fair question. Annoying in its framing, genuinely fair in its substance. I decide to answer it before Adrian can get there first. None, I say. My input carries exactly the authority you find convincing after you've heard it. Same as anyone at this table. Harvin blinks. That was not the answer he was prepared for. He had a follow-up argument ready, and now it has nowhere to land. That seems reasonable, says the woman across from him. Lady Marin, I learned, responsible for the eastern trade routes. She says it the way someone says a thing they've decided to say before all the information was in. Pre-committed to reasonable. I file that as potentially useful. Someone who decides to be reasonable as a policy rather than a reaction is a different kind of ally. The council meeting takes 2 hours. It covers grain reserves, a disputed border claim to the northeast, and a tax collection shortfall. I say almost nothing for the first hour. I listen. I watch who defers to whom, who has the real information versus the formal position. Harvin has the formal position. The woman to his left, a quiet administrator named Solon, has the actual numbers. I note the gap. In the second hour, when the border dispute reaches an impasse between 2 lords who clearly hate each other on personal grounds, I ask one question. Just one, quiet and direct into the space where the argument has stalled. What does the village at the center of this actually want? Complete silence settles over the table. The 2 lords look at me, then at each other, then at Edrin, then back at me. Nobody has an answer ready. It occurs to me, I say, that 12 people in a room deciding what a 13th community gets without asking them is a familiar pattern. I don't say what it's familiar from. I don't have to. The parallel lands on several faces in the room with visible effect. Edrin says quietly that he'll send someone to the village to ask. The meeting moves on. Neither lord looks particularly happy. But Harvin, I notice, has stopped with the aggressive neutrality and shifted into something closer to watchful consideration. Progress. Small, but real. The kind that compounds over time if you don't get impatient and push it faster than it wants to go. After the meeting, Saris finds me in the east corridor. She has a piece of paper in her hand and an expression of professional resolve. I've drafted the formal role definition, she says. Senior advisor on matters of unusual significance, as we discussed. Responsibilities include direct access to the Crown, standing invitation to counsel, authority to request information from any department. And the part that will bother people most, she continues, independent review authority on any policy affecting non-human entities. I look at her and at the paper in her hand. You added that last part entirely yourself, I say. The non-human entities clause, that wasn't my suggestion. I did, she says, because it will matter in 6 months when something comes up that we haven't thought of yet. Better to have the authority early. That's good thinking. That's the thinking of someone who has watched administrations come and go and knows where the gaps appear. And there's a problem, I say. The role is mine, but the paper says senior advisor. That implies service to the Crown. It implies relationship with the Crown, she says, which is accurate. Service is one kind of relationship. This is a different kind. Partnership is the word I would use, I say, if we're being precise about it, which I find we should be in situations like this one. Bilateral arrangement of mutual benefit and recognized autonomy, she says, quoting Edrin's announcement back at me precisely. The smallest possible smile crosses her face, then, apparently, mine, at exactly the same moment. I file that away carefully under unexpectedly useful. She hands me the paper. I look at it. The language is careful, precise, leaving room where room needs to be left. You are genuinely very good at this, I say. The language, the structure, the gaps left in exactly the right places. It's impressive work. 3 administrations, she says simply. Then she turns and walks away down the corridor with the air of someone who has more on their list. On the second morning after the coronation that became something else entirely, 3 days into the new arrangement, Edrin's people find Cale. He's been hiding in a storage building near the south gate, the kind of place that gets used for overflow grain in autumn. He's with his sister, a girl maybe 10 years old named Petra, who has the same nervous hands and the same kind eyes as her brother. When the palace messenger brings me to the building, Cale is sitting on a crate with Petra asleep on his shoulder. He looks up when I come through the door. His expression does 3 things very fast. Relief, then confusion, then something more careful. You're not burning anything right now, he says when I walk through the door. Not what I expected as an opening line. Accurate, though. Not right now, I say. The acute part is finished for the moment. We've moved into the complicated phase, which has different requirements entirely. He looks at me for a moment. 14 months of morning visits and quiet conversation, and this is the first time I've spoken back. You could always understand me, he says, not accusing. Just arriving at a conclusion he'd probably been circling for a while. Every word, I say, from the second day. You told me about the grain tax dispute on the second day, and I found it very informative. Petra wakes up at the sound of voices. She looks at me with the direct, unself-conscious stare of a 10-year-old encountering something unusual. You're on fire, Petra says, looking at me with the direct, unself-conscious attention of a 10-year-old encountering something new, mildly interested. Yes, I say. It's not the dangerous kind right now, more like a pilot light than a house fire. You don't need to move away from it. Okay, she says, and puts her head back on Cale's shoulder. Decision made, threat assessed, back to sleep. I like her immediately. Cale asks what happens now. It's the question I've been preparing an answer to since the morning I decided he was leaving safe. What happens is this. He has options. He can go wherever he and Petra want to go, with resources to make that possible. Or he can stay in a different role, one he chooses rather than one assigned to him by whoever needed a cage keeper at the time. I watch him process that, the word choose doing visible work in his expression, like a muscle he hasn't used in a while. What would staying look like? He asks carefully. Not committed, just gathering information before he decides. Honestly, I say, I don't know yet. The whole arrangement is new, and we're building it as we go, and most of it is uncertain. But you'd be there voluntarily, I add, for reasons you picked. Doing things you agreed to, that part is non-negotiable. He's quiet for a while. Petra has gone back to sleep against his shoulder. The storage building smells like dried grain and old wood. He clipped your wings, Cale says finally, meaning Edrin, not asking, stating, making sure we're both looking at the same fact. He did, I say. 4 days before the coronation, 2 mages with silver shears, specifically designed for the purpose, who was well organized. And now you're working with the man who ordered that done to you, Cale says. Not judging, just holding the fact up to the light to look at it. I'm working near him, I say. There's a difference. Working with someone means shared goals. This is more like shared territory. Is that enough? He asks. The question of someone who has spent time thinking about what enough actually means. I don't know, I say. But it's more than I had 3 days ago, and 3 days ago was more than 14 months of a cage. He looks down at Petra, at the top of her head against his shoulder, doing the calculation that people do when they're responsible for someone. "We'll stay," he says, after a long enough pause that I'd stopped expecting him to speak. "For now, to see what it becomes, and if it goes wrong, we leave." "You leave," I say, "whenever you decide." That's the condition. That's what makes it different from the previous arrangement. He nods. Not the controlled single nod I've learned from Edrin and Saris. His is slower, more personal, more like a breath released. I leave them in the storage building with instructions about where to go in the palace. He'll figure out the rest. He's resourceful. On the way back, I pass the east corridor, the one that runs along the outside wall near the old cage room. I stop. I look in. The room is exactly as I left it. Melted bars, still half standing, bent outward like something that gave up an argument. The gold is discolored where the heat was highest. The cushion is still there, slightly singed at the edges. The silver water bowl. Someone has swept the floor. I noticed that. Someone came in and swept the floor of the room I melted out of. I find that interesting. I stand in the doorway for a while. Not with feeling, or not only with feeling, also just looking, cataloging. Old habit. This is what a cage looks like when it's been left. When the thing that was kept in it decided to leave and couldn't be stopped. Not dramatic, not ruins. Just a room with bent gold bars and a singed cushion and a silver bowl engraved with birds that can't fly. I think about leaving it open. Edrin agreed to it, the reminder. But standing here, I realize the reminder needs a frame. A person who walks through this room without context will see a fancy bird enclosure that's been damaged. That's not the story. The story is what was kept here. What it was thinking all that time. What it was building, quietly, while it looked like it was just sitting. I make a note to talk to Saris about a plaque. Not a long one. Just enough to tell the people who walk through what this room was. On the third day, the reconvened ceremony happens. The one that's supposed to reflect the actual nature of the current situation. Edrin asked me what I thought the ceremony should include. I told him I thought that was his question to answer, not mine. He looked at me for a long moment after that. Then he said, "I'm asking because your answer is part of the actual nature of the situation." That was the most genuinely honest thing Edrin had said to me across 3 days of careful, calculated conversation. I respected it enough to answer. "Include the cage," I said. "Take the court through the room before the ceremony. Let them see it before they see the crown." He did. That morning, before the ceremony, every member of the court walked through the east room in groups of 10. I stood in the corridor outside and watched their faces as they came out. 12 groups, 120 expressions. Most of them were complicated. The kind of complicated that means something is being reconsidered that was previously settled. Harvin came out with the watchful consideration still in place, but underneath it, something that might eventually become discomfort. Lady Marin came out and walked directly to the window at the end of the corridor and looked outside for a full minute before moving on. Saris didn't come out with any particular expression. She came out and looked at me, and then looked at her notebook and wrote something. I didn't ask what. I'm starting to feel less urgency about knowing what Saris writes in her notebook. I think she'll tell me eventually. The ceremony itself was shorter than the traditional version, and structurally different in ways that will be analyzed for years. Edrin stood at the front of the throne room. Tapestries replaced with plain fabric, scorch marks on the stone still visible, and he spoke first before the crown, before the oaths, which is not how coronations work, which was the point. He talked about what the kingdom had been built on, the story of the phoenix and the divine approval and the blessed rain. He didn't say the story was wrong. He said it was incomplete, that a story that requires something to be caged in order to be true, that story has a problem at the center of it that eventually walks out through the melted door and stands in your throne room. The court was very quiet during all of this. It was the specific quality of quiet that settles over a room when people are actively deciding something about themselves. I was standing to the side of the room, not at the front, not participating in the ceremony directly, present but not performing. When the crown came out and the priest began the formal induction, I watched Edrin's face as the crown was placed on his head. Not triumph, not relief. Something more like, this is the beginning of a difficult thing, and I'm choosing to do it anyway. I understood that. I understood it better than almost anything else he had done or said in 3 days of very close observation. The choosing of difficult things. The difference between choosing them and having them assigned. I had been thinking about that distinction. After the crown was on and the oaths were given and the court performed its ceremonial responses, Edrin turned toward me. He didn't call me to the front. He didn't make a gesture or a speech. He just looked at me for a moment across the room, the look of two people who have made an arrangement that neither of them is entirely sure about, acknowledging that they've both committed. I held the look. I did not nod. That's his gesture and Saris's gesture, and I'm not adopting it. I just held the look. Then the ceremony was over. The court began the transition to the reception, which I declined to attend on the grounds of preference. Instead, I went to the east wing window at the end of the corridor, the one Lady Maren had stood at for a full minute that morning. I stood at it and looked out at the view she had looked at. The city of Verith spread below, stone and tile and market squares. 100,000 people who had woken up 3 days ago certain of what their kingdom was, and less certain of it this morning. They didn't know yet what had changed. The news would move from palace to city in its own time, in its own shape, with its own distortions. By the time it reached the outermost districts, it would be half legend already. The phoenix broke free and bargained with the king. Which is not exactly wrong. It's just missing the parts that matter. The 14 months, the patience, the morning routines, the fig. Cale appeared beside me at the window. He and Petra had found their way to the palace and been given rooms, as I had arranged. He stood next to me and looked out at the same view without saying anything for a while. We were good at that by now, the quiet. What happens to the city when they find out? Cale asked eventually, looking down at the market squares and the streets in the ordinary afternoon. Probably chaos for a few weeks, I said. Then adjustment. People are more adaptable than institutions. Institutions catch up slowly. Are you staying? He asked. Not, are you staying forever? Just, are you staying? The present tense version, and the one that matters right now. For now, I said. Same words he had used in the storage building. He recognized them. The corner of his mouth moved slightly. Below us, the city of Verith went about its afternoon. The markets, the streets, the ordinary work of 100,000 lives. None of them knew yet that the bird in the palace cage had been thinking for 14 months, that it had made plans and kept count. They would find out. Things like this don't stay contained in throne rooms. They move outward, through the city, into the stories. And stories are how kingdoms understand what they are. His father's story had held things together. Now there would be a new story. I didn't know yet what shape the new story would take. That's the thing about being at the beginning. You can't see the whole shape. You can only see what's directly ahead. The next meeting, the next decision, the next morning when the fire in the hearth recognizes the fire in you. I could work with that. I had spent 14 months in a cage, learning to work with limited information and long time frames. The window was open. That was the part that mattered most, standing here. The window was open and I had chosen to stand in front of it, not flying away, not because I couldn't, because there was something worth staying for, something being built, something not yet named. Cale stood beside me at the open window and we looked at the city together, and neither of us said anything else for quite a long time. Below, somewhere in the market district, a trader was probably selling a story about the palace fire to anyone who would listen. Getting it mostly wrong, leaving out the important parts, keeping the dramatic ones. That's how stories travel. But the real version was here, in this corridor, in the empty cage room down the hall with its melted bars and its singed cushion. In a 14-year-old boy standing at a window next to a phoenix, both of them choosing, every day, to see what came next. A month passes, then 2, then 3, and I start to understand what it actually means to rebuild something from the inside. It is nothing like burning it down. Burning things down is fast, immediate, satisfying in the way that release is always satisfying. Rebuilding is slow. It happens in council meetings and corridor conversations and small decisions that don't feel significant until they compound. It happens in the gap between what Edrin says and what he means, which I'm getting better at reading with every passing week. It happens in Harvin's gradual shift from aggressive neutrality to something I'd cautiously describe as grudging professional respect. It happens in Lady Maren asking me directly, 3 weeks in, whether I think the Eastern Trade Route negotiation is being handled correctly. I tell her I think the Verith side is negotiating as though it has more leverage than it currently does, which is a common mistake. She looks at me for a moment. Then she says she'd been thinking the same thing and wanted a second read before she brought it to Idrin. That moment, that specific moment of being asked for a second read, is the first time I feel like something real is happening here. Not the throne room, not the melted bars, not the ultimatum and the deal and the careful language about bilateral arrangements. This, being asked what I think by someone who actually wants to know, not someone managing me or assessing me or keeping me contained. I give her my honest read. She takes it to Edrin. The negotiation shifts. The outcome is better than the previous trajectory suggested. Harvin grumbles in my direction at the next council meeting that things were working fine before outside input was introduced. I tell him things were working adequately, which is different from fine, and that adequately is not the goal I'm interested in. He grumbles more specifically. But he doesn't argue the substance. The substance is the part where I'm not wrong, and he knows it. Adrian watches these exchanges with the expression of a man who has decided to let things develop and is reserving judgment carefully. This is one of the things I've come to understand about him. He reserves judgment the way some people hoard resources, carefully, strategically. He will not tell me he thinks something is going well until he has enough evidence to be certain he isn't wrong about saying so. I've decided I can work with that. It's not warmth, it's not trust. But it's honest, which in its own way is more useful than warmth. Kale has found a role in the palace library. This happened organically, which is the best way for things to happen. He started by spending time there because Petra needed somewhere quiet to stay while he figured out what came next. Then he started organizing the East stacks, which were in a condition that Cirrus describes as creative disorder, and I would describe as chaos. Then the head librarian started leaving him more complex tasks, and then started asking for him specifically, and then started paying him. Nobody assigned him the role. He drifted into it because it suited him, and he suited it. I find this deeply satisfying to observe. Petra, meanwhile, has attached herself to the kitchen with the same organic inevitability. She is apparently very good at bread. The head baker told Cirrus, who told me, that the girl has an instinct for dough that takes most people 3 years of training to develop. Petra, when I passed this along to her, said, "I know," with the matter-of-fact certainty of a 10-year-old who has never doubted herself. I find Petra very clarifying. She has no history with the previous arrangement and no investment in any version of what I used to be. To her, I'm just the person who lives on the east side of the palace, and occasionally sets things on fire by accident when distracted. I've set 2 curtains on fire accidentally. Both times when I was thinking hard about something and let the fire get slightly ahead of me. Both times, Petra appeared with a bucket of water before any significant damage occurred. I've started to think of her as a fire prevention system. The cage room has its plaque now. Cirrus handled the wording, which I reviewed and approved with only minor adjustments. It says, "This room held a phoenix for 14 months. The phoenix was not harmed. The phoenix was not asked." Those are different things. 12 more words follow the period. Consider what else in this kingdom might fall into the same distinction. That's the whole plaque. Edrin read the plaque draft and was quiet for a long time. Then he said he thought the last line was too direct. I told him I thought the last line was the only reason to have the plaque at all, and that direct was the appropriate register. He looked at me with that cold, measuring expression for about 8 seconds. Then he said fine, and didn't raise it again. The plaque has been up for 6 weeks. I've watched people read it. The reaction I watch for most is the pause after the last line. Some people pause for 1 second. 2. Some pause long enough that the person behind them has to step around them to keep moving. Those are the people I find most interesting. The ones the last line actually lands on. The ones where something shifts when they read it. Harvin paused for 11 seconds. I counted. He didn't look at me afterward. He just walked away down the corridor with his hands behind his back. The same posture Aldrich used to use when he looked at me through the bars. I noticed the inheritance pattern again. I file it differently this time. 3 months in, something comes up that none of us were prepared for. The thing Cirrus had left room for in the role definition. A traveling merchant arrives in the capital with a cart covered in secured crates and a permit that describes the contents as exotic goods. The permit is legitimate. The crates are not described with sufficient specificity, and the sounds coming from inside them are not goods. I am the one who hears it first because I was in the market quarter for reasons unrelated to the merchant, and sound carries to me differently. The sound is low, intermittent, the specific frequency of something alive and contained and not quite sure if making noise is safe. I follow it to the merchant's cart. I stand next to the cart for about 30 seconds. The merchant asks if he can help me. "Open the crates," I say. My voice carries more heat than I intend, and the merchant takes a step back before he's decided to. He explains that the crates are secured for transport and will be opened at their destination, and this is standard practice. "Open the crates," I say a second time, with considerably more fire in it and considerably less patience than the first time. The merchant opens the crates. Inside are 3 creatures I don't have names for yet. Small, luminescent, clearly not from this region. They are alive. They are frightened. They have been in those crates long enough that the bedding inside is several days old. The merchant explains quickly that these are legally obtained specimens, bound for the private collection of a lord in the northern district. He has papers. The papers are in order. The legal framework for what he is doing was written before I existed in this kingdom. I look at the 3 small luminescent creatures in their crates. I look at the merchant with his legitimate papers and his legal framework. "What are their names?" I ask the merchant, who is still explaining the papers. "Not what you call them. What are they called by themselves?" The merchant blinks at me. "They're specimens," he says, with the tone of someone explaining something obvious to someone being deliberately difficult. "Not what you call them," I say. "What do they call themselves? What are they? Where do they come from? What do they want?" The merchant stares at me. He has absolutely no answer for any of these questions because nobody has ever asked them. I take the crates. The merchant protests very loudly and at considerable length about the papers and the framework and the Lord. I listen to all of it. Then I take the crates anyway and I carry them to the palace and I find Saris and I put them on her desk. This, I tell Saris, setting the crates down carefully on the clear space she's made, is exactly the thing you left room for in the role definition. She looks at the crates, then at me. Then she opens her notebook and starts writing. Tell me everything from the beginning, she says. What follows is 3 weeks of the most complicated policy work I've been involved in since the throne room conversation. The merchant takes his complaint to the Lord, who takes it to the council, who brings it to Edrin, who brings it to the meeting where I am present. Harvin argues that the existing legal framework is clear, and the permit was valid, and property rights are property rights. I argue that property rights depend on the thing in question being property, and that determination has been made too easily for too long. Lady Marin asks quietly whether anyone has attempted to communicate with the creatures to determine their capacity for preference. The room goes silent in the way it went silent when I asked what the village wanted. The same silence, the same recognition. Saris presents a proposal. It draws heavily on the role definition language, non-human entities, unusual significance, bilateral consideration. The proposal is not radical. It doesn't overturn the existing framework wholesale. It adds a step, a single required step. Before any non-human entity can be classified as property, someone must attempt to determine whether it has preferences about that classification. That's all. Just the question. Required by law, with the result documented, before the paperwork proceeds to the next stage. Harvin calls it impractical. He says you can't ask a fish if it wants to be caught. He used the word fish 3 times for emphasis. I point out that the creatures in question are not fish, that the distinction between can't ask and haven't tried is significant, and that the legal framework was written by people who had never met a phoenix and assumed all non-human entities were equivalent. The vote is 7-5 in favor of the proposal. Harvin votes against, Lady Marin votes for, Edrin casts the deciding vote. He votes for it. He doesn't explain why. He just says yes and moves to the next item. That's the most he ever says when he's decided something. After the meeting ends and the council files out, I find Edrin in the east corridor and I say 2 words to him simply and directly. Thank you. He looks at me. The measuring expression, the reserved judgment expression, then don't thank me, it was the correct policy. It was also the right thing to do, I say. Not just the correct policy, the right thing. Those are worth distinguishing when they overlap. Those aren't always the same thing, he says. The voice of someone who has been in enough rooms where they weren't to know the difference clearly. No, I agree. They aren't always the same, but when they happen to be, I think it's worth stopping for a moment to acknowledge it out loud. He looks at me for 1 more second. Then he turns and walks away down the corridor with his hands clasped behind his back. I watch him go. I think about the posture, the inheritance, what gets passed down without anyone deciding to pass it. Then I go back to Saris's office where the 3 luminescent creatures are still in their open crates on her desk. We've been trying to communicate with them for 3 weeks. It's slow work. They are cautious and have good reasons to be cautious. But there has been progress. Small, careful progress. The kind that feels like nothing and then suddenly, one morning, is something. That morning, the smallest of the 3, the one Petra has taken to calling Ember because of course she has, makes a sound. A specific sound directed at me at the moment I walk through the door. The same sound twice in the same register both times. It takes me and Saris most of the morning to work out that the sound appears to correlate with the fire visible in my wings. The creature is not afraid of the fire. It's interested in the fire. It keeps making the sound and then looking at my wings afterward. I let the fire in my wings brighten slightly, carefully, and the sound changes. Higher, more frequent, clearly reactive. Saris is writing so fast her notebook pages are turning quickly. This is the most animated I have ever seen her, and it's remarkable. I sit on the floor of her office and I let Ember look at my wings for 2 hours. It seems like the least I can do. By the end of those 2 hours, we have established 4 things. The creatures have preferences, they have communication, they have curiosity, and they are not property. Not legally yet. The legal change will take time, the way legal changes always take time. But functionally, right now, in this room, not property. Ember makes the sound again. I let the fire brighten again. The other 2 creatures inch toward the edge of their crates. Saris sets down her pen. She looks at what she's written, 2 full pages, and then at the 3 creatures in their crates, and then at me. You know, she says, I used to think the most interesting thing that would happen in my career was observing a phoenix. And what do you think the most interesting thing will be now? I ask. Genuinely curious what answer she's already working toward in that notebook. Now, I think it's whatever comes after the part where the phoenix changes the legal definition of what can be property, she says. I think about that, about what comes after. about the shape of a thing you can't see yet because you're standing at the beginning of it. I don't know what comes next, I say honestly. I genuinely don't know. I've stopped trying to plan 14 months ahead. If you've stopped planning 14 months ahead, Sarah says, what do you do instead? What does patience look like when it's not a countdown? I watch, I say, and I wait for the thing that needs doing, and I try to do it with the right amount of fire. She considers what I've said for a moment with her characteristic stillness, then she picks up her pen, then she puts it deliberately back down. The first time I sat in front of your cage, she says, the third observation session, I wrote something in my notebook. I know you wrote something, I say. I've been wondering about those 3 or 4 lines for several months, actually, since the beginning. She opens the notebook to a page near the beginning. She reads aloud, without particular drama. This bird is thinking. Adjust all assumptions. 4 words and an instruction. That's what she had figured out in 3 hours of sitting in front of a cage. Adjust all assumptions. You are correct, I say. More correct than you knew at the time, possibly, since I was still figuring out the full extent of it myself. I'm usually right, she says. The problem is usually that being right happens before the world is ready to do anything about it. Is the world readier now than it was then, I ask? For what being right about that actually means in practical, daily, ongoing terms. She looks at Ember, who is making small, intermittent sounds in the direction of my wings. Then at her notebook full of new writing. It's readier than it was, she says. Which is, I've learned, the closest Saris gets to optimism. I'll take it. The months continue. 6, 7, 8. The kingdom of Vareth is not transformed. I want to be clear about that. It is not suddenly just or wise or fundamentally different from what it was. Kingdoms don't transform in 8 months. What it is in motion. Moving in a direction that wasn't its direction before. Slowly, with friction, with setbacks and arguments. Harvin remains difficult. 2 of the Northern Lords resist the new policy on non-human classification with everything they have. The Eastern trade negotiation falls apart twice before it holds. The grain reserve situation gets worse before it gets better. Edrin makes 3 decisions. I disagree with strongly enough to say so directly, and 2 of them he doesn't change, and 1 he does. That one change prevents something that would have been genuinely bad for approximately 4,000 people in the Western District. I think about those 4,000 people when I'm frustrated with the 2 decisions he didn't change. It helps with perspective. Cale gets officially appointed as assistant head librarian at 7 months. He comes to find me and tells me with the careful manner of someone who has learned to hold good things gently. That's not surprised, pleased, I tell him. That's the face of someone who knew they were capable of something and is relieved to be proven right. He looks at me with the expression of someone who did not expect to be read that precisely. Then, that's a very specific thing to say about my face. I've had considerable time to study faces, I say. 14 months of watching people through bars will do that. You learn to read the details. He smiles at that. The real version of the smile, not the tired one I saw in the storage building, the one that fits his face correctly. Petra has graduated from bread to pastry, which the head baker describes as a natural progression, and Petra describes as inevitable. She told me last week that she's thinking about what she wants to do when she's older, and that she's considering 2 options. Option 1, become the best baker in Vareth. Option 2, become the person who figures out how to talk to Ember and the others. I told her those weren't mutually exclusive. She said she knew that. She just liked having the list. I completely understand the impulse. On the 9-month anniversary of the morning I walked out of the cage room, I go back and I stand in the doorway again. Same room, same melted bars, same singed cushion. Someone has replaced the silver water bowl. The new one is plain pottery. I find I like the plain pottery bowl better, less performed care. More like something someone put there because it's useful. People walk through this room regularly now. It's on the informal tour that palace staff give visiting dignitaries. Not the official tour, the real one, the one that starts at the kitchen and goes through the parts the formal tour skips. I've watched a few of these. The guide, a young woman named Tessel, who has worked in the palace for 6 years, tells it well. She doesn't dramatize. She doesn't use the word symbol or sacred or divine. She just tells what happened in the order it happened. This room held a phoenix for 14 months. The phoenix was well treated in every material sense. The phoenix was not asked. Those are different things. Then she reads the plaque, out loud, including the last line, and she watches the faces of the people she's brought here. I asked Tessel once what she thinks when she reads the plaque to visitors. She thought about it with genuine seriousness for a full moment before answering. Then she said, I think about all the things we've decided have no preference without asking. And how long that list probably is? 11 seconds is about how long Harvin paused at the plaque, I remembered. Tassil's answer takes approximately that long to sit in the air. I leave the cage room and I walk out to the eastern courtyard, which has become something like my preferred thinking space. Open sky, a fountain that someone keeps running year-round, a bench that I don't use because I prefer the ground, but the bench is there. Adrian finds me there sometimes in the evenings. Not often. He's not a person who seeks company as a general practice, but occasionally. When there's something on his mind that needs the specific quality of thought that happens in outdoor spaces. Tonight he sits on the bench. I'm on the ground nearby. Neither of us says anything for the first few minutes. Harvin told me something today, Edrin says eventually, after enough quiet that I'd stopped waiting for him to say anything specific. What did Harvin tell you? I ask. Specifically. Because his version of compliments tends to arrive wrapped in several layers of complaint first. He said the kingdom runs better with the phoenix in it. A pause. He said it in the context of a complaint about the policy costs. But he said it, I note, which means he's decided it's true, even if he hasn't finished deciding how he feels about it being true. He said it, Edrin confirms, and the way people say things they've decided are true before they've fully accepted being true. I think about that, about Harvin and his aggressive neutrality and his 11 seconds at the plaque, about what moves through people slowly. He'll get there eventually, I say. He's a man who thinks in complete sentences. He just needs time to finish the sentence he's been on. Possibly, Edrin says. Or he'll retire and his successor will start from a different baseline and we'll have a different problem. That's also fine, I say. A different problem is a sign of forward movement. The same problem repeating is how you know something is genuinely stuck. Edrin is quiet for a while. The fountain runs. The fire in my wings has settled to the lowest glow it goes, the resting state. I'm going to ask you something, he says. The specific tone of someone who has been holding a question for a while. You don't have to answer it. If I don't want to answer, I'll say so directly, I tell him. That's a simpler system, and we've been using it successfully for 9 months now. When you came into that throne room, he says, on the coronation morning, did you know what you were going to say? I consider the question properly, the way it deserves. The honest answer is more complicated than a simple yes or no, and he deserves the honest answer. I knew the 3 options, I say. I'd been running them in my head for about 6 weeks. The exact words, no, those came in the moment. The part about what the story required, he says. The part about a story that needs something caged to be true having a problem at its center. Yes, I say. I'd been working on that part specifically for considerably longer than 6 weeks, closer to 4 months if I'm being accurate. He nods, the slow, thoughtful version of the nod. My father built everything on that story, he says. I grew up inside it. I know that, I say. I watched him do it through the bars for months before I understood fully what I was watching him build. I thought it was true, he says. Not defensive, just factual. The specific tone of someone accounting for their own history accurately. It was true in the ways it needed to be true for him, I say. That's not the same as being true, but it's not nothing either. What made the story stop being true, he asks, or stop working, whichever it was. He's careful with the distinction. I appreciate that. I think about this carefully, because the honest answer requires honesty about myself as much as about him or his father. I stopped letting it be, I say. That's the real answer. The story needed my cooperation to function. I stopped cooperating. Edrin absorbs this. The fountain runs. Somewhere in the palace, someone's window is lit warm orange, probably the kitchen, late baking. You could have simply left, he says, again. The same observation he made 9 months ago in the throne room, still not fully resolved for him. You keep returning to that point, I say. The leaving. You've said it twice now over 9 months, which suggests it's genuinely unresolved. Because I don't fully understand why you didn't, he says, and I find things I don't fully understand worth returning to. I look at the sky, at the stars coming through in the parts between the clouds. The same sky from the cage window, same arrangement of light. When I first hatched, I say, the fire didn't feel like mine. It felt like something that had happened to me, something I was managing. 14 months of a cage, and I figured out, slowly, the way you figure out anything real, that it wasn't happening to me. It was me, all of it. The anger and the patience and the fire and the watching and the counting of days, all mine, all the same thing. And when I figured that out, I say, I realized that something being mine doesn't mean it has to be spent on leaving. Edrin is very still, the way he was still in the throne room when I walked through the door, the choice to be still stillness. It can be spent on staying, I say. If there's something worth staying for, if you can choose the staying rather than being trapped in it. The fountain, the stars, the warm window in the palace, somewhere with bread being baked by a girl who has never doubted herself. Is there? He asks, quietly. The most unguarded thing he has asked me in 9 months of careful, calculated interaction. There is now, I say. There wasn't when I hatched. There is now. That's the difference between the first day and this one. He looks at the sky for a while after that, not speaking. I don't fill the silence. Some silences are doing work and shouldn't be interrupted. Eventually he stands, straightens his jacket with the precise, habitual motion that I've learned means a conversation is concluding. Before I go, he says, Cirrus mentioned communication progress with Ember and the others. She said significant, which from her means substantial. It has been significant, I say. We think they have a concept of home. We think going there is something they actively want. That changes things. That will be complicated, he says. Legally and practically both. But I assume you know that and are telling me anyway. A statement, not a question. Most things worth doing are complicated, I say. That's usually how you tell them apart from the things that aren't worth doing. Another almost smile. Faster now, more comfortable than the first one in the throne room. Still brief, still gone quickly. Good night, he says. The tone of a man who means it as more than a closing phrase, which is something I've noticed developing over 9 months. Good night, I say back to him. And I mean it the same way, which is also something I've noticed developing without deciding to let it develop. He walks back into the palace. I stay in the courtyard. The fire settles. The stars come out more fully as the clouds thin. I think about 9 months ago. About waking up in a room with a window that opened and testing it 4 times before I believed it. About Kale in the storage building with Petra asleep on his shoulder. About Cirrus and her 3 lines and adjust all assumptions. About Ember making sounds at my fire and the slow, careful, surprising work of figuring out what someone else is trying to say. About Harvin and his 11 seconds. About Lady Marin at the window. About 4,000 people in the Western District. About the plaque on the cage room wall. Those are different things. Consider what else in this kingdom might fall into the same distinction. About bread that rises because someone has an instinct for it. About a library getting organized because someone suited the work. About a king who votes for a policy that costs him political capital because it is the correct policy and he has decided to be honest about that. About fire that is not something happening to you, but something that is you, fully and entirely available to be used or not used. About the difference between being kept and choosing to stay. About how long it took me to understand that difference from the inside. I spread my wings in the empty courtyard, the full wingspan, both wings completely extended the way I never could in the cage. The fire goes bright, white gold, the real color, the one Cirrus circled in her notebook 3 times, and then I let it settle, not performing, not demonstrating anything to anyone, just existing fully in the right size for the moment I'm actually in. The sky above Verith is wide and dark and completely full of stars, and it does not care about any of what has happened here. It was the same sky the morning I hatched, damp and confused in a gold cage with 14 months of patience ahead of me. It is the same sky now, 9 months after I walked out through melted bars into a corridor that smelled like burning tapestry. Same sky, same stars. The world underneath them, this small piece of it, this complicated, friction-full, slowly moving piece, that has changed, is changing, will keep changing, badly and well, with setbacks and with unexpected small gifts like Ember making sounds. I stay in the courtyard until the kitchen window goes dark, until the palace settles into its late-night sounds. Then I fold my wings and go inside through the window that opens fully, that I tested 4 times on my first night in this room. It still opens, fully, wide enough to fly through. Every morning I check, because some habits are genuinely worth keeping. It still opens. That still matters. I close it behind me. The fire in the hearth is low and warm. I sit in front of it the way I did on the first morning. Tomorrow there is a council meeting, a trade negotiation follow-up. Cirrus has a session with Ember planned that I've been invited to attend. Kale wants to show me something in the library archive he found while organizing the East Stacks. He says it might be relevant. Petra is apparently attempting a new recipe that involves something she describes as a controlled burn of the sugar at a very specific temperature. She asked me to supervise in case of accidents, which is both practical and a kind of joke, and she knows it's both. I said yes. There is work to do. There is always work to do in a place that is in motion, moving towards something it hasn't finished becoming yet. I sit in front of the fire and I think about this, about the difference between a place that is finished and a place that is still becoming. About how a cage is finished, defined. The bars are where they are, and the rune is what it is, and the size is the size. And about how everything worth being in is the other kind. Unfinished, still figuring out what it is, still open to being more. I was kept for 14 months in a finished thing. I've spent 9 months in an unfinished one. I know which I prefer. The fire in the hearth breathes. The fire in me breathes with it. Same fuel, same warmth. the right size for right now. Tomorrow, the meeting, the negotiation, the session with Ember, the library archive, the controlled burn of sugar at a very specific temperature. Tomorrow I will get up before Kale does, because old habits, and I will check the window and it will open, and that will still matter. And then I will go do whatever the day turns out to need, with the right amount of fire, with the patience I built in a cage, with everything that was fed into me during 14 months of careful, deliberate, fully committed waiting, and then freely spent, not on leaving, on staying, on this specific, difficult, unfinished, completely worthwhile place and the people making it. The fire is the right size, the window opens, the stars are where they always are. Everything else is still becoming. That is enough. That has always been enough. I just needed to be somewhere I could choose it for it to feel like what it is.